Okay, good afternoon, everybody. You survived the party last night and VMworld 2015. Really appreciate you attending the session today. My name is Matt Coppinger, and I'm presenting with
Jack McMichael.
So Jack and I both work in the end-user computing part of the business at VMware, and we're very excited today to take you through Horizon View troubleshooting, looking under the hood. Before I start, a few comments about this presentation. There's quite a lot of text in some of the slides, so I won't apologize for that, because we actually want you to take the slide deck away as reference for some of the things that we're going to be talking about today. So, we'll be walking through all of that stuff. You've probably seen this slide a number of times this week. I don't think we'll be talking about any kind of future features in the product, so we should be safe. But if we do stumble into that area of roadmap or future features, you'll have to excuse us and not hold us to it. And hopefully, you're all familiar with this slide as well. Sanjay presented very eloquently this week on VMware Workspace Suite and what VMware is doing around enabling business mobility. I'm not really going to kind of dive into this, but one thing I will say personally, I've been with VMware for 8 years now, working originally on the VDM2 product and all the way through right up to now to the Workspace Suite. And certainly over the last 2 years, I think all of you would have noticed this kind of huge momentum that we've got within the business unit, within end-user computing. We've got a huge number of products now. We're doing a lot of innovation, and it's a very exciting time for us that have kind of been there at the start when VDI kicked off and seeing what we're doing now, not just with desktop, but with mobile, content collaboration, and those underpinning services such as Identity Manager, all running on VMware's One Cloud. So it's a great time to be working with VMware in the end-user computing space. And of course, you would have seen this one as well. Our products now are starting to lead the market. AirWatch Mobile, a market leader. Horizon Desktop, now fantastic. We're now considered a market leader by IDC, leapfrogging Citrix in regards to our features, functionality, and adoption by customers. So again, an exciting time for VMware EUC. So the agenda today, we're going to be taking a look at some of the common issues that our customers face. We'll take a look at some of the things that our global support organizations see, the top kind of 5 or 6 things that they see when customers contact them for support. We'll be looking at the kind of things that could go wrong in a Horizon 6 deployment, and we'll look at those different kind of problem domains, everything from just trying to connect to an environment to the availability and provisioning of desktops, application management such as IDSH, and what happens when your server infrastructure breaks, such as the connection brokers. And we'll wrap that up with a kind of look at how you can monitor performance and troubleshoot performance in your environment. And finally, just some resources there, some things that you can reference. Personally, my team works very hard on our reference architecture documents. These are kind of lab-validated architectures and designs where we've stress-tested our products and integration pieces. So there's some really good, very technical documents out there showing you how you can set up and configure an environment and get the kind of performance that we would expect from a Horizon 6 environment. So top VMware Global Support Services tickets, SSL and domains, okay? How we allow you to handle SSL certs within our products has been, somewhat of a challenge for some of you. And I think Jack will walk you through, some best practices there. Connectivity. So we will take you through kind of the network architecture of Horizon 6. It is constantly evolving. For those of you that keep up with our quarterly releases for our client and agent, we are constantly adding new features to that, and sometimes using additional, ports, network ports for that kind of functionality. Client drive redirection, USB redirection, our protocol, our BLAST protocol, our piece of OP protocol. So it's really important that you pay attention to those changes from a network perspective. We've got persona management and now user environment manager. So we do have some unique configuration and permission things around persona management. So we do have, some challenges there, some common issues that customers face. And of course, we have a saying within, EUC, yeah? Friends don't let friends P to V, right? You don't want to take a physical desktop image. And I can't believe, kind of 6 years later after we've been kind of evangelizing about that, we still walk into, customer cases where people have kind of, virtualized their physical image or thought that they've optimized the image, but still left some very resource-intensive applications on their image. So we'll take a look at that as well. PCROP sizing. What was once a dark art, right? Wasn't really much you could do with PCROP from a settings and optimizations, and we've done a lot of work around allowing you now to kind of optimize and tune PCROP, and also talk about some of the network connectivity things that are required in network optimization. And logs. You need to be able to troubleshoot, and a lot of our presentation today is really allowing you to identify some key things, key operations within View, and how you can spot whether they've been successful or failed from a logs perspective. How do you collect those logs? Where are they? Yeah, and how you can start doing some troubleshooting on your own.
Let me take it over. Let's talk about some SSL certificates. Hopefully, some of you got that Ren and Stimpy graphic. We'll throw back there. SSL certificates have been a common issue for years now because, as we move forward and as we move into a world where SSL is just required for everything that's, done over, HTTP, right? We can't allow a non-secure connection anymore. So that's been a struggle for a lot of people. Fortunately, things have gotten easier in subsequent versions of Horizon. And so one of the things that we want to talk about with SSL is just the process of actually going through it. It can be quite simple if you know the process, but there's a couple different kinds of SSL certificates. We have internal certificates if you have an internal CA. We have, a standard SSL certificate that's issued by a top-level CA out on the internet, like a GeoTrust or, various ones that are out there. We also have intermediate certificate authorities that are, require a certificate chain, and that center one is really the key where a lot of people get stuck not having a correct chain. So we have a great guide, and I think this might even be, I know this guide is still out there. I think we might even have it updated even further than this. But keep in mind that we make this deck available, so I know you're welcome to take as many pictures as you want, but feel free to come download it after VMworld, and you can get all these links, so you can go grab this documentation, as well as all the log analysis that we'll be looking at. But this is a great guide that goes through installing SSL certificates with Horizon. But this is the general walkthrough here of what we're going to do when we add certificates. Now, who hasn't, show of hands, who has never installed or worked with Horizon View? Great, just a couple. That's fantastic. So hopefully some of you experienced this before, but for those who haven't, or for those who maybe are still using the default certificate that gets installed when we install Horizon, this is a great little walkthrough for how you're going to actually install that certificate, generate the CSR. Using Microsoft Certificate Authorities makes this much, much easier. When we used to use the Java-based key tools early on in Horizon in the 5 series, it was much, much more difficult. So these days, it's much easier to import those certificates and generate CSRs, generate certificates back. But this is the basic walkthrough. So later on, if you take a look at that guide, reference this walkthrough, and it hopefully will help you really get your environment to have a valid certificate that then won't create pop-ups for your customers or your internal clients or anyone that's trying to use the environment, whether it's an administrator or a user. So I know this is a bit of an eye chart, but this is a great one that our colleague Ray Heffer put together. And we have this old graphic that's probably still in this deck hidden behind here. But the point is complexity, right? We know that there's a lot of ports, but as we evolve the product and we add more functions, we've had a tendency to have to add more ports. So this is a great reference to really look at all those ports, what components they're going to, which components use them. Again, a good reference. It's on the VMware blog. You can also go grab it there. But we stuck it in here for you just to get an idea of all the connections that you need to understand and know from a firewalling perspective as well as a troubleshooting perspective. Because if these ports aren't open or if they're inhibited in some way, maybe you have some sort of optimizer on your network, that's the kind of device that could interrupt a good connection from your client to the server or to the desktop. So some of the troubleshooting keys I'm going to go over real quick. First of all, we have a graphic of the dashboard. Since most of you have installed Horizon, you've seen this dashboard. This is a great source to start, right? We have very, Sesame Street simple, like we like to say, about having green, red, yellow, right? You understand if there's an issue or if everything's good. So on the dashboard, you see the system health summary, and then on the side, you see more detail. This is a great tool to always check as an administrator, understand if you're having any issues. I'm sure a lot of you have seen this, but the key points here, checking logs, setting the logging level. That's something that a lot of folks don't realize they can do. And out of the box, we set the logging level on some components to one level and others at another, just because it can generate a lot of data. So understanding how to do that can really help your troubleshooting effort.
And Jack, just to go back onto that slide there, the dashboard right now is showing red. Why might that be the case on a default install?
Does anyone know? That's right, self-signed cert. A self-signed cert. So as you know, as we just discussed, really, by default, we ship with the self-signed cert. We did this because we want to encourage our customers to make sure that they're using secure communications, be it internet-trusted CA or an internal one. But either way, having something other than the self-signed cert is the best.
Quite worrying, isn't it, when you kind of install View and it's very simple, and then the first thing you see is a big red box on your connection server dashboard.
It is, but I think it's a best practice, and that's why we made the decision to do that. To have a signed cert from some CA other than the connection broker is definitely the thing to do. So you've deployed Horizon for the first time. What kinds of things can go wrong? You could have a random disconnection. You could have a connection, you type in your user password, you get a desktop popping up, but it's all black, right? We get a black screen. Maybe it says there's no desktop sources available. There's a number of connection problems or drops or other things that could be happening. Maybe it's the desktop is slow. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of break these into some problem domains and talk about some of the common things in the logs that you can look for, as well as some common solutions for those. As part of that problem domain, we have a lot of components within the Horizon suite, right? We have our RDS hosts, we have our virtual desktops, we have Workspace, we have View Composer, we have connection brokers, we have security servers, we have VIDM, our identity manager, we have link clones, we have full clones. There's a lot of pieces to this puzzle, so we understand that it can be difficult for customers at times to find where the problem is in that chain, right? If we have all these components, sometimes it's difficult to understand where to look. And so hopefully at the end of this session, you have a better idea of what these problems are and where to go look. So again, common challenges: can't connect, log on failures, black screens, poor quality, right? We talked about PC over IP tuning. There's a lot of things that can happen from a connectivity standpoint that can cause a poor user experience. So here's some real meat for you in terms of the logs, right? Where to look. The on Horizon Windows components, so a Windows desktop, a Windows client, the connection broker also on Windows. All these things are going to. I need to update that. It's not. I guess we're not using 2008 anymore, are we? They're all going to be in the same place, though, right? C:, or whatever drive you normally use, C:/program data. That's wrong too, gosh darn. Program data and the application data needs to be removed. I don't know how I let that slip through. It's program data /VMware/VDM/logs, and that's across the board on all the components. So that's the key. I'll make sure that gets updated before we ship this out to you guys. But that's the place you got to go look on every component. If you don't know that location, please learn that location. You're going to use it a lot. Also, the events database. One of the most common things that we see is customers will deploy View. Maybe they're doing a proof of concept. Maybe they're even in production. But the first time they experience a problem, they call our global support. Say, hey guys, we're having some issues. And one of the first questions they say, let's take a look at the logs. Then the global support guys are going to say, what about your event log, right? And a lot of customers say, what event database? I haven't done that. So it's really critical. We can't stress enough how useful it is to set up an event database. It's a relatively small footprint. You can control the size. It does grow, but you can control it. But what it does is it gives you yet another source of queryable actions, right? We can see things like logins, log-offs, connections, disconnections, errors. All those things get logged into the database, so it's another great tool.
And I think just to add to that, I think there's, hopefully most of you are familiar with our Flings website, labs.vmware.com, where we've got a number of great tools for Horizon View, and there is one there that will allow you to monitor the event database, right, and query for certain things and notify you on certain events. And what we've done in this presentation is really highlight some of those key events that occur during login and access to a desktop.
Yeah, it's a great point, Matt. If you guys haven't looked at our Flings website, please take a look. We have a link at the end of this presentation. So what we wanted to do is highlight a few of the log entries that you might want to look for if you're having a connectivity problem, because there is a process to a connection for Horizon View. There's an attempt to connect, there's authentication. All these things are going to have an entry as part of the process. And what we're going to do, I have some of them listed here for you to see. These are typical log entries that you would see. And you can see the first one, client connects. I don't know if I can reach over here. Yeah, this isn't going to reach as a laser. One of the things you can see, the first entry, client connects. So you can see where we have a request. We have an XML post. You see an authentication, attempting to authenticate user in user X and domain Y. These type of entries they stick out, and if you know what to look for, you can really start to follow. The biggest thing here, though, and this is what we're going to show you a little video on that we put together, and we're going to walk through how you can kind of step through a connection process through a log using a grep type utility, or even a tail type utility.
So Jack, just to go on to the client connection, that will validate the client device actually attempted to connect to the connection broker, correct?
Right, so even if the user gets there and maybe they fail authentication, or the number of reasons that we discussed previously on why that user is not getting a desktop, it should stick out very clearly if you know how to follow that connection through all the many of lines of log entries. And so one of the key things here is you see we have highlighted this where it says session 7072 ****, and a bunch of other things. This is a session ID, and we use the asterisk as a security measure because we want to make sure that that information is somewhat safe, but we do need to be able to track it, so we leave some of it out there exposed. And this is a key identifier to be able to follow a session as it's going through the process on the connection broker. This is a screenshot of a video we're going to show you here on the next slide, but I wanted to just kind of highlight, when we're using a tool, we can start looking in this particular video or screenshot, you can see that session, that line with session that I've highlighted. We take the session ID and actually start looking for that, and these tools will highlight the session, and really you can just start parsing the bad information out. Right? You don't have to, because let's face it, if you have a production environment with 10,000 desktops, you're going to have a lot of log entries on a connection broker or on these maybe 7 connection brokers that you have. So let me play a little video here, and I'm going to walk through it. So this is a little one day a couple years back, because this has been the case for that long. If you use a tail, this particular one's called BearTail Pro, and they also have a utility called BearGrep Pro. And all it is if you're familiar with Linux, it's just a Windows-based tail or grep utility. And so what I'm doing is I'm actually loading a log, and I'm trying to find a particular session. And I've added some annotations down there just so you can kind of see how we're walking through this process of finding a user and following their connection all the way end to end. And so what I've done is I've highlighted an area that I'm looking for. I can start adding things like highlights and add different values like a username or a session ID, all key indicators of what I might be looking for. And when you do that, it makes the logs much smaller, right? And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to filter out the white noise and learn how to compress this giant log into something that's really more easy to troubleshoot, right? That's the point here. We're trying to figure out why can user Joe not get to his desktop. And when you have, a million lines of log entries, it's somewhat difficult to do that. So this is just demonstrating how you can use this type of tool to add these highlights and filters to really compress those logs down to something that's really more meaningful and makes it much, much easier, because when you take that white noise out, it becomes very apparent what you're seeing in front of you.
And I think, Jack, it's safe to say that the slide previous, or the 2 slides back, when we show those key log events, that's the kind of stuff that you want to filter for. Those are the kind of top events that you should be filtering for to show you whether or not the user successfully connected to the connection broker, authenticated to the connection broker, was allocated a desktop session, and connected to that desktop session.
Exactly.
So those are the kind of key logs that we would expect you to try to filter for using one of these tools.
Exactly, and so what we're going to do through the rest of these sections is kind of highlight some of those things, those key words, and we'll bold them and show you the things that you can start looking for. So when you take a large log, you filter it down using these type of tools into something that's a little more meaningful, then you're armed with the keywords that you need to know to look through those and understand that process. Let me go ahead and, there we go. So, another big issue when we're having connectivity, black screen of death, as we like to call it, right? Just kind of like a blue screen of death, all these other screens of death that are out there.
How many of you have experienced the black screen of death?
Yeah, good question.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Well, it's common, right? And that's because a lot of
we've got a problem.
Yeah, because a lot of people don't have UDP available on their firewalls, right? And that's the big one, right? A lot of firewall admins only allow TCP into an internal network, and that's understandable. There's not a lot of things that use UDP, but from a streaming perspective, there's no question that UDP is better for our purposes here, so that's why we use it. And that's why you typically experience it.
I think next year we're going to invite one of the PMs to come along and we're going to ask that question again, just to kind of highlight the importance of maybe helping us out there around how we can avoid this issue.
So one thing to note about the logs that we've been talking about to this point, these are all the Horizon logs, right? But we use PC over IP from Teradici. We've made a lot of enhancements to that, but they have their own set of logs as well, and those logs are going to be located in the same place. Another bad URL, but they will be in the same place. And you can look through. Now they're a little harder to parse through, but we did put a couple things here to look at, like your virtual channels. You'll see things like DevTap, so keywords like that to look at. And DevTap refers to the devices, right? Your keyboard, your mouse. So those are the type of logs that you would also need to when you call support and to try to understand what's going on with PC over IP.
Yeah, and I think the key one here is typically sometimes the agent gets, or display driver gets overwritten, and that's that first error attaching to SVGA DevTap. That's the error you'll get if there's something wrong with the agent install or the device or the display driver in the desktop. Right. The second one there is really the connection timed out. Quite obvious, right? The session failed to connect. So when a user is authenticated and tries to connect to the desktop, the connection broker actually authenticates and logs into the session and launches the PCRIP server component, and that sits there waiting for and expecting a connection from the client. Okay, so that's where you'll get this connection timed out. It launches the PCRIP session on the virtual desktop, and it's waiting for the client to connect. Now, if you don't have your firewall configured correctly for UDP and TCP on port 4172, it will never connect. They'll get that black screen, right? The black screen of death, and you'll see this connection timed out log on the virtual desktop.
Right. One other note here, a lot of times if you're making PC over IP connections from outside your network, a lot of times the common cause for a black screen is if you don't have the right external URL configured in your security servers or connection servers if you happen to be using that. Making sure that we can tunnel, but also tunnel PC over IP is important. So when you're configuring your connection servers, there's a checkbox down there. We have some documentation on using IP addresses versus host names in those two boxes. So a good thing to look up if you're experiencing black screen of death, which looks like many of you have.
How many of you trying out vGPU with View? Hands up if you're kind of doing the 3D workloads. Okay, so we can see sometimes we get black screen of death with 3D workloads, again, because of the incorrect display driver, right? There's something wrong with maybe the NVIDIA display driver that's been installed onto the desktop. So you need to look out for those things as well. And one experience that I've had certainly is you need to make sure when you're doing 3D, getting the correct version of the NVIDIA driver for the guest. Okay, that's critically important, otherwise it just doesn't work. And there's a number of NVIDIA drivers out there, so please just make sure you verify with the NVIDIA deployment guide that you've got the correct and the latest version of the NVIDIA display driver.
Absolutely. So some other things we talked about earlier: poor quality display. If you're having maybe some fuzziness or dropped areas, or maybe the session just drops out from underneath you. So some things to look at in the logs here: loss equals. Those are going to actually be in the PC over IP logs. That's a great line to look for. We typically would like to see those numbers pretty low, like less than 0.10. And you can see in this little excerpt, it's 0.45. So there's some loss. Some packets are being dropped. Maybe it's a WAN optimizer or something, right? There's something.
We see a lot of issues with Wi-Fi connections.
Yep.
I don't know how many of you have got users accessing their virtual desktop through Wi-Fi.
Right.
And if you've got a Wi-Fi that spikes in latency or there's some issues there, PC will pick that up, some packet loss, and start to reduce the bandwidth that's allocated to the session. And that's what can lead to a degraded user experience or even a disconnected session in certain cases. So we highly recommend, and in fact, you must be doing some kind of network optimization for PC over IP. It's a UDP-based protocol. It should be treated like VoIP. It should be prioritized. It should be shaped, and there should be some level of QoS. Make sure you're prioritizing PC over IP.
Yeah. And with the randomly disconnected desktops, sometimes every now and then there's just a glitch in the matrix, right? Maybe we've made a connection attempt, and for some reason things get a little stuck. We don't see this as much these days, but it still does happen. And when you have a pending expired entry in those logs, that's essentially the server's waiting, and it finally gives up. But unfortunately, it doesn't report that correctly, and so we can have people still trying to hit the desktop, or maybe even creating a secondary session, and things can go a little haywire there, and sessions can disconnect. So if you see pending expired, usually indicates that there might be trouble with that desktop. Perhaps it just needs to be rebooted or even refreshed, recomposed. So
and the basic issue here is we have a process that's kicked off when the user logs in called the Session Manager, WSSM. And its job is to connect to the connection server and give regular status updates on the session. But if that connection doesn't happen for whatever reason, either the process didn't start or there was some other issue, okay, if it doesn't connect to the connection server after 15 minutes just says, okay, no one actually connected, I'm not getting any information about this session, it's dead, I'm going to disconnect the user. Yeah. And that's when you get this, some people report a randomly disconnected session. Really look at the connection and disconnection times. And if it's 15 minutes, right, you're looking for this pending expired log in the event database.
These days it seems like it happens with multi-factor authentication, right? Because that affects the GINA in Windows, this chaining of authentication. So something to think about if you use multi-factor authentication. So another thing, desktop availability. Maybe we are trying to get to a desktop and it says nothing is available. There's a number of reasons why that can happen. Because we have this client-server relationship, the Horizon agent with the Horizon broker, occasionally it will think that there's no desktop available because maybe the agent isn't reporting back and giving us a correct status, or perhaps there are none available because the composer has stopped reprovisioning things, or there's a number of reasons that this can happen. So it's important when you're trying to diagnose why a pool doesn't have any desktops available that you go look at the connection broker logs and understand the counts that it sees. So I can't remember how many minutes, I think it's every like 2 minutes or something, the connection broker will log and this is why we have so much log spam, right? There's things like this get logged, but that's because it's useful as an administrator to know. But we'll put session counts. We'll say how many total sessions we have, how many, all these numbers on what we think the current state of things is. And it's very plain and clear and right there, and you can see it. And so if it thinks there's no desktops available, you're going to see that desktops available 0. So you can look at it and you can see, I think we also have an entry here, we'll actually return that information when the connection connection is made by the user. So you can see at the bottom there.
Yeah, once they've authenticated, what will happen is connection server will go and check to see if there's any available desktops, okay? And so then it will pass that, that list of desktops back to the client so it can be displayed and they can click on an icon and obviously access their desktop. And that's what you're seeing in that, that log right there. It's specifically saying is, I have found available desktops in that pool for this user, right? So that's a critical one. If your user says, hey, I've got this error message that's saying contact my system admin, right? There's no desktop available. You can quickly jump into the log, search on the user's username or their session ID there, and see if they've actually had any desktops returned to them.
Right. So here's, again, this is more, dumping data for you guys to have as a reference for later. Some things to look for in the actual logs. You can see the broker desktop request when in an event database. This is going to be logged as an entry that you can query. So you can see how, if people are having trouble, if you have a bunch of users calling your help desk, this is the kind of thing that you could query for in using one of our flings or just manually yourself. Go look in there. So some of the things that happens, we have an allocation to user from the pool, and you can see this entry here. You can see another broker machine allocated. So there's a request, there's an allocation. You can see then after it's allocated, you'll see the SSO attempt if you have that enabled, which 99% of you do. A user will it'll try to pass those credentials and attempt to log in. So maybe if it tries and it's not, or maybe there's an authentication error. Another reason why maybe it's not getting allocated a desktop from the pool because of an authentication error. So I
think it can be a little bit confusing in our LDAP schema around the OU is servers, right? And that's actually talking about a desktop session.
Yeah, yeah. And when this product was created a long time ago, it was in the infancy of virtual desktop. So there are some nomenclature like that that's interesting. So it's good to point out.
And I think the last log there, sometimes you'll get users that call up and say, I tried to access my virtual desktop and I'm sat with a login screen. Okay, and this essentially means that the single sign-on has failed somewhere. And within the logs, what you're looking for on the connection server is this log at the bottom here where it says, using domain for SSO, right? And it's got the user's session ID there, and it's got the domain that they've attempted to authenticate to or have authenticated to. And if you don't see that, then the user will be sat on that screen.
Yep.
That login screen.
So again, here's some more things to look for. Agent pending, right? We talked about pending expired a second ago. That's because once we get to a certain point, the agent it's allocated the desktop. It's waiting for the connection to actually be initiated from the client, and so it goes into a pending status. And so when it does expire, it gets to pending expired. But until then, if you're getting to agent pending, then it's ready and it's waiting. It's been allocated. So these are things to look for in the log.
And this is occurring before the user actually connects to their desktop.
Right.
Okay, so the login process, the authentication login process happens way before the user is actually even connected to the desktop, because we need to launch our session management process, okay, which you're seeing here, starting the session, okay, or the broker says, hey, desktop, start the session. The agent responds, said, yep, got your message, I'm starting up the session. Okay, and there's a bunch of stuff that happens then around firing up the PCRP server on the desktop, then the client connects, and that's at the point where the user starts to experience the desktop.
Yeah, so these entries on both these pages are in order, right? So we put it that way specifically so you can, when you refer back to this, these are the kinds of things you can look for in that order. And if you don't see one of these, then you know, well, okay, that's maybe where we went wrong. So that's why this is a good reference to consider, because obviously at the bottom there, once we have agent connected, then we should be good, right? There should be no problem. We're in, everything is copacetic. So
and a final point on that last one, where when the client connects, okay, we get this PCRP log entry, but we also get actually a Windows terminal server log as well. Don't panic. They've not connected via RDP, okay, but PCRP sits on top of the terminal services framework, right? And that's where we're officially supported with all of the Microsoft APIs there. So you will get this Windows terminal server session log on that you're probably used to seeing with RDP. That occurs also with PC over IP.
So we're going to talk about the LDAP for a second. I'll breeze through this because it gets a little deep, but we do have a couple things to show you. Again, this is, we'll provide all this as a reference so you can come back. But for those that don't know, Horizon is built on an LDAP infrastructure. That's one of the databases that we use to manage all the objects within Horizon, so that we can look at desktops, users, domains, applications, the whole thing. So when you need to look at an object, maybe a desktop, it should be available, but it's not, you do have the ability to go query that database just like any other database. And so we put a couple things in here in reference just so you know that you can go query an object. And it's not the easiest thing, but we have a lot of KBs that you can go find on our knowledge base website to go find queries, to go look for objects and see maybe has something gone wrong there, right? Desktops may be available, but it's showing not available. So we can go into the database, into the LDAP, and actually look at those objects. So a couple common attributes that you might want to look for if you're searching: display name, the actual display name of the VM, the snapshot. Maybe it's if you're recomposing a lot, you may need to see, has it gotten on the wrong snapshot? Did a recompose go wrong? Right? These are things that can happen. The path, the state, maybe if the VM is, there's some errors in vCenter because it thinks it's in one place, but another administrator maybe moved that VM to another folder.
That never happens.
No, never. Right, so things like that, if you're trying to understand what Horizon thinks the data is, because unfortunately vCenter doesn't report back to us. If an administrator moves a desktop to another folder thinking, oh hey, I'm just going to reorganize this just to make sure things are good, no one steps on each other's toes, well, he's just broken the whole deployment when we try to recompose, because we don't know. vCenter does not tell us that it's moved. So that's how you can go find it, go look and see where the path actually is set to, and then you can move it back to that path and everything's good again. So here's an actual query. If you use the LDAP tool that's built into Windows, we put this in here for your reference, so you can actually see. You would use even the brackets. You could paste this query in there and actually find a VM with a particular name, or find a VM with a particular snapshot. Maybe there's this rogue VM out there. So again, for your reference, just something to have in your toolbox if you have an issue come up in your Horizon View.
So one thing I will point out here is there is a knowledge base article on how you can access the LDAP database using ADSI Edit or any other tool. But we do have a disclaimer here: is be very careful about how you access this. Don't go around changing stuff unless someone from GSS or a KB article specifically stated so, because you can really kind of mess things up if you start freely just editing values in the database. So just a warning there.
Absolutely, that's a great warning. And we're going to have another query here in a slide or two talking about the Composer database. Same deal. Be very, very careful when you're working in these databases, because there's no going back sometimes. Right now, we do make backups of this by default every night, but if you don't want to have to revert it if you don't have to. So the events database, we've talked about this a number of times. There's a Horizon Events Notifier, one of our good colleagues, Chris Halstead, he built. It's one of our flings. Definitely recommend it. It's cool for having alerts sent on different events that happen. Great tool. So we have tons of great tools out there. But if you are so inclined and you are a SQL kind of guy, you can definitely go out there, write your own queries, and do what you need to do to find different events as they occur, or maybe create alerts, or if you need to check every day and see how many disconnections did I have, or how many errors did I have, you can go do it. It's just a regular SQL database, and it's available for you to query. Provisioning errors. So this can happen certainly if you're in an environment where you recompose a lot, or maybe you refresh a lot. So things to look for in the logs: broker provisioning error. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward, right? There's a number of reasons why this can happen. Maybe the parent image, the snapshot chain has actually changed. Maybe someone has created a new snapshot and deleted an old one, and so the path has changed. That's again something we can query, we can look at. But if you have a provisioning error, or if things aren't coming back up when you start recomposing, these are the kinds of things you would look in the event database and the logs for.
And one thing I would point out there is, obviously, you can now install View Composer on a standalone machine, and we've had a few customers do that, but forget to ensure that View Composer has network access to the ESXi hosts, so it actually couldn't do any provisioning. Another common one I've seen is some confusion between kind of vSphere admins and desktop admins around how many ports on a virtual switch. And you're trying to spin up, 256 desktops, right? And the virtual switch has been put down to like 16 ports on the virtual switch, so it doesn't get an IP address. All those kind of things, DHCP scope, those kind of things you need to check. Connectivity is critical when provisioning as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I had this question come up in Hands-On Lab. These days most people are deploying with ephemeral virtual switches, but there still are a lot of people who've had environments that have been around that are using static desktop or static port binding. And so this is an issue that still happens today, where you run out of ports if you start scaling up. So something to think about for sure. For desktop availability, maybe all the desktops are there, and you're like, why are they not connecting, or why are they not available? Ran out of ports. Good point. So again, already used. Now this, you don't see this as much anymore because we actually made some changes to allow for handling this situation better. But it does still happen, especially if you have a legacy environment in the 5.x Horizon series. So having an agent that gets into a weird state where it's been logged into and it's supposed to refresh, but it hasn't, and for some reason it still thinks it's available. These kinds of things happen. So if you see an already used desktop status in the Horizon administrator, that you can go clean those up, but something to look for. It gets into that strange state. Also, domain join. Now, again, we don't see this as much these days, but it does happen, right? If Horizon has lost its ability to talk to your domain, maybe you have a large domain infrastructure, maybe you have a large forest with a lot of subdomains. One of the things that's has been a bane for a lot of people is one-way trust. We're addressing that in the latest release. Fortunately, I know a lot of people are happy about that because we haven't had a way to handle one-way trust previously. So, hopefully domain issues will start to subside a little bit.
And that will ship in Horizon 6.2, which
that's
is
right,
which is out this week.
Out this week. So something that's going to be real nice for people who have those large enterprise domain structures.
I mean, a common one I think is you just need to check that the credentials are correct, right? So manually go through the process. Whatever credentials you're using, just check in vCenter that you can actually provision from a template, right? And do those kind of things and make sure, just validate that the credentials and the service account that you're using is correct. A lot of people just assume and they put in, some service account and then, they don't check that they can manually go in and use that account with vCenter.
Yeah. So looking at RDS, obviously now a lot of folks who have Horizon 6 are looking at application publishing and using RDS. So, RDS is pretty straightforward from a Horizon standpoint, and typically the issues really more lie from a Microsoft perspective, right? Making sure your licensing is there, making sure that compatibility, making sure that your device and resources are set correctly. A big one. Profiles, if we have people who need to save data, making sure profiles are set up correctly. So we put some reference material in here for you from Microsoft's TechNet, but it's pretty straightforward. It typically just works or it doesn't from an application publishing standpoint. So some best practices. This is the one I think that if you do see problems with RDS applications, especially if you're in an environment where you tend to shift servers around. We like to recommend that you don't disable host swapping, because when you have the memory reserved for all those servers and it starts shifting around from host to host, there's some performance impact there, right? So if you're serving up a lot of applications, enabling hyper-threading, not allowing overcommitment of the CPU so that you don't get into a situation you have just the resources that you need and no more, no less, right? You kind of like what we do with desktops. A lot of times people will, not, have the memory allocated, so we don't have swap files.
I think there's, hopefully most of you have seen the Horizon 6 reference architecture document. It specifically goes into sizing best practices and performance of RDSH. Just to point out, the session limits here per host is 150 by default. Now, in our reference architecture, we're recommending around about 32 sessions per RDSH host, and then you can scale that up and have maybe 4 RDSH hosts per ESXi host, depending on obviously how much CPU and memory you have in your host. But please do check out the Horizon 6 reference architecture for further information on sizing and performance characteristics of RDSH.
So the last two big pieces are the broker and performance. So let's just to quickly go through some of the common broker issues. Typically the broker, it's just managing all these transactions, right? So normally you're going to see most of these problems like we discussed earlier on the desktop, the client, not so much the broker, but things do happen, right? If we have a large environment with a lot of brokers, then potentially we could have some replication issues on that database. The AD-LDS instance may have some trouble if there's any sort of network glitch. We could have Composer, having trouble. We could have, sometimes vCenter likes to go up and down. Now we've implemented caching mechanisms and things on the back end to try to help handle those dips, right? But there still can be connectivity problems. So places to look, event, same places everywhere else. The logs, event database, those places are going to be the key places to look. So from a sizing perspective, to ensure that you don't have any outages or any dips, right? We used to really recommend a much smaller footprint, but these days we try to say beef up your connection brokers. If you're in a large environment and you're not in a POC type scenario, give your hosts, give your connection brokers, decent resources. For vCPUs, especially if you're doing, heavy traffic, 2,000 desktops, 16 gigs of RAM. So here's just a little reference slide for you again. If you need to check your replication of the database on the back end, here's where you can actually do it. Here's the command you would actually show. And you could do this on all your brokers to actually look and see what the current status is. So here's a little example screenshot of what it would look like. This is actually just on one broker, so it's not an amazing example, but if you had a large topology with 7 connection brokers, you would see the status for every broker listed there, and you could see, is there a problem between them?
And just to go back, we're using that LDAP database, and we're using the basically ADAM or AD-LDS to replicate changes to that database across our connection server farm. So that's why replication is critical within the server environment.
Just like Active Directory.
Yeah.
So vCenter server connectivity, if you see a VC down event, that's going to be in your events database. If we've lost our connectivity to vCenter, obviously we really depend on vCenter. We need to understand what the current the power status is of all the virtual machines that we're managing. So if you see VC down, then you're not going to be able to communicate, and it could impact the availability of desktops. So again, it will show red in the dashboard. Look for those types of things in the events database, and if you have an impact or an outage, that's where you could go check. So here's some specifics. When in View Composer, if you get VM stuck in a deleting status, that's typically if you have a lot of desktops that are being recycled, recomposed. Sometimes they can get stuck, and so what we have is we have a slide here on cleaning up the database. Now, normally this doesn't happen, but you can have issues where if you're doing a lot of recycling of desktops, recomposing, sometimes a glitch happens, right? Maybe there's a SQL issue. So make sure you look at the actual database and Virtual Center to make sure that there's not something else holding up the queue, right? Because we issue those things to Virtual Center, and they can get held up like a lot of things. But those will be in the logs, and we do have a lot of KBs that cover this type of stuff.
But specifically in the View Composer log, you're looking for the virtual machine with input specification already exists.
Yep.
That's basically Composer saying, hey, I'm looking at Virtual Center, and that desktop it's there. So I'm not gonna reprovision it, right? Because it hasn't been fully deleted.
Yep.
It's just that out of sync between the Composer database and the Virtual Center vCenter database.
And the biggest thing, the number one issue, that if you're going to have an issue with Connection Broker, is JMS, or Java Messaging Bus. This is what we use to communicate with all the components. So if you're not familiar, all the agent, the client, the brokers, the security servers, everybody communicates on the back end with the Java messaging bus. So sometimes if we have a network glitch, we can have a split brain scenario. Now, we're pretty good at kind of syncing things back together, but sometimes this does happen. And if it does, definitely recommend you call our global support guys. But you can see these things with rejoin and resync. You'll have those messages in the logs. And if you start seeing rejoin and resync, then it might be worth talking to your network guys.
So the connection servers are responsible for provisioning, right? So, and they need to orchestrate that across connection servers. We don't want all connection servers trying to provision a whole bunch of desktops, right? So this is really important, and this typically happens when people try to, install a connection server in one site, and then essentially, a duplicate of that connection server, another instance of the connection server in another site, and link them together, right? And it seems to work. It seems fine. But as soon as you start to get that latency, and we get that kind of, JMS gets interrupted, it can severely impact your environment. Connection servers start to provision desktops. You start to get the kind of a lack of integrity around session status. So users can't get access to their desktop.
Yep. So this is just a reference. I spoke about it earlier. This is, just talking about the relationship between Active Directory, AD, LDS, and View Composer. If you do have orphaned or broken linked clones are out here, this just is kind of showing you the steps that you would want to do. And again, there's just KB articles on this, but I just wanted to highlight the process so that you understand it's doable, right? Don't panic. If you do have a real serious situation, we have a lot of linked clones that are in a bad state, it is fixable. So that's really why this is here. So you can use this SVI config utility. That's how you can unprotect replicas. You can do the cleanup. Definitely call our support guys. I just wanted to kind of show you what the process looks like. Again, this is also for reference, so I'm just going to kind of breeze through it. But this is a pretty nasty query and very destructive. Don't run it unless you absolutely have to. But this is how you don't have to start all the way over, right? If you've just gotten to the worst point possible, this is how you can clean things up without having to reinstall everything.
And this is cleaning up the View Composer database, right? Not the vCenter database.
Correct. So if all your link clones have really gone bad, just for your reference. So lastly, in this section, cloud pod architecture, this is new. We have a lot of customers starting to try this, so we just wanted to talk about the things that are critical here is the size. Obviously with cloud pod architecture, we're only supporting 20,000 total users, allowing to have multiple pods, 4 pods total over 2 sites. The logs are going to be in the same place, but we use the same technology, ADLDS, just another database that syncs between those pods. So the log entries are going to be virtually the same, right? We're going to be looking for the same type of things, just in another layer.
But there is an additional port that's required. We use a protocol called VIPA between the 2 pods. So you've got a view pod in one site and another view pod in another site. You need to make sure, obviously, connectivity between the 2 sites supports this VIPA protocol.
Right, and I believe that's in that network diagram. So something to think about. And sorry, we're moving a little quickly because we're going to run out of time. Obviously, we have a lot of technical information here, and we like to try to talk about all of it with you guys. So the last section that we're going to talk about, though, is performance. So we'll kind of breeze through, and again, a lot of this will be reference for you. We hope that you guys know in a Horizon View environment, we have some fundamental things: storage, network, CPU, memory, right? And so we have some great tools available to look at these and try to be proactive about managing your environment and knowing beforehand that you may have some performance problems that are impacting your users, and try to prevent people from having to call the help desk and say, I'm having trouble, I can't connect, or it's running very slow. So we have a lot of tools within vCenter and also vRealize Operations Manager. So the things to look for: CPU, having a host utilization with some headroom, right? We can't max out CPU. We need to have some headroom. We want to be able to handle the fluctuations of boot storms, things like that, right? When we have a lot of people logging on, logging off, we need to make sure we have headroom both with CPU and with memory. So use things like ESX Top, use the performance graphs of vSphere, and look and make sure that when you're at a steady state where you have all your users logged in, if you are hitting over 90%, you maybe want to think about adding some capacity to your environment.
And also, obviously, size to ensure that you can handle a host outage. We've seen a number of customers, they size, they've got like a headroom of 20% or something, but as soon as the host goes down, that's it. They're 100% CPU or memory utilization, and that just kills everything. Right. So make sure you're sizing to accommodate for a host failure.
Right. And again, storage, another big component, right? Now, these days it's getting better. A lot of you guys are going out and buying flash arrays that just do amazing amounts of IOPS and have amazing speed, so it's becoming less of a problem. We can provide that iPad-like experience with a virtual desktop, but still, if you are running a legacy storage or SAN, NAS, whatever it may be, you need to look at that actual ESX, D average or the K average, either one, any of them, just to make sure that it's less than 25 milliseconds, right? We don't want to have a high latency because it's going to impact that performance. One thing that we like to recommend is another fling is the VMware OS Optimization tool. We're actually working on a new release for this. I get a lot of requests on Twitter. I get a lot of requests on email asking, hey, when are you coming out with Windows 10 templates? We're working on it, I promise. We're working on templates for Windows 2012 R2 for RDSH hosts. This is a tool that I'm involved with. It's a great tool. If you've never heard of it, go to our Flings website and check it out. It can really reduce, the amount of services and things that are running in your Windows environment.
I mean, we see typically a 40% saving across resources when you take on board the recommendations.
Yeah.
So the tool also has a mode where it can just check your existing image, right? You don't need to apply all of the recommendations, but you can certainly check your image to see if it's optimized.
Yeah. So let's skip. So we have a quick video that we're going to just show about vRealize operations. If you haven't heard of vRealize operations, Matt, why don't you tell them about the benefits?
Well, absolutely. It's a single pane of glass, right, where you can absolutely just very quickly spot issues in your environment end to end. So here what we're seeing is I'm just typing in the user search, right, and immediately it shows me all of the components in the infrastructure that are relating to that user's desktop. And then as soon as I can see, green, red, yellow, I can scroll down, click down into some of the metrics. And we're moving a little bit quickly here. But now I've also got some custom dashboards, and I can see immediately kind of PCRP sessions that have got high latency, users consuming the most bandwidth, okay, sessions with the highest packet loss. So we've got some really nice custom dashboards. And vRealize operations for Horizon ships in our enterprise version of the products, and we really highly recommend you use that as a single pane of glass, okay? We can look at things like PCRP statistics, performance of the VM, we can do in-guest metrics as well. So a really powerful tool that can very quickly help you spot where the problem exists, storage, network, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, a lot of people come up to me and ask, is it required? No, it's not required, but will it help you? Yes, because it really lets you be proactive. So something to think about if you have a large Horizon environment. This is just, again, another reference one that I stuck in here for you guys. If you have problems and maybe they're happening at night and you're not in the office and you really don't want to be on call, this is a great script that you can run in ESX to be able to capture performance snapshots. Maybe you're having users are saying, you know what, it's 8 o'clock at night, something's happening, I don't know what's going on. This is a script that you can use to look at that and replay it and look at that performance over time. So this particular one I think goes for 8 hours. And it's a great tool in your tool chest just to look at performance when you're not right there in front of the console. And that's it. So in summary, we wanted to just kind of highlight all the main areas, the problem domains of a Horizon View environment. There's a lot of good places to look. Of course, the logs, the event databases. Those are the places that you need to go look to understand what's going on in your environment. If you need help, we have the knowledge base, we have the DCS Support tool, which can actually collect a lot of information about your components, and you can use that to give it to GSS. You can use it for yourself to look at what's going on with that desktop, look at the logs, and it will gather all up for you. So
I want to call out DCS Support because it runs a number of tests in your environment and writes the results of those tests to some other logs. So it's actually doing some validation and checking of your environment. So it's really worth running this tool, opening up the logs, and just seeing some of the results of the tests that it's done.
Yeah. And if you have any questions, I really encourage you to engage with us on Twitter. I'm on there all the time. I like to hear from you folks that run this all the time. We live in a bubble here at VMware, so we run it in our labs. We work with it with our customers. But I like to hear what kind of problems you're having. Tell me so that we can talk more about your problems and the issues that you're experiencing. So definitely, let us know. Tell us what you think. Fill out the survey. We'd love to get your feedback. We try to make this obviously as technical as possible, but we have to cram it into a short period. So thanks again for coming, and hope you have a good day.
We'll take some questions though.
If you have any questions,
yeah, let's have a look. Thank you, everyone. I hope that was a really good session for you. Please vote on the survey, but we will take a few questions.
Yeah, please step up to the mics if you have questions. Let us know.
On the left-hand side.
The piece over IP, the black screen of death, Well, we've seen that, and you kind of talked about the ports and such, and that's well and good for a piece of IP session that never connects with the black screen. But what we're seeing a lot more now with piece of IP is with our non-persistent link clones on initial contact, we get the black screen of death. There's a 10-second delay. It disconnects. We've saw this on our full clones for the last 5 years or so, but it's only on initial contact. We're seeing it a lot more now because now we're moving to a non-persistent state. So not, it's first contact every time. So
right.
Oh, that's strange.
It could be related to the resolution of the client that they're using to connect to, and whether that's
kind of on their side or our side, if you will.
On both,
on
right?
Both.
So you need to make sure that they're compatible, because what I've seen in a number of occasions is if obviously if you change to some extent on the virtual desktop the resolution, it can lead to a disconnect. But also sometimes if they're using a very high resolution display here that's not supported on the desktop, it connects, you get black screen and then disconnects, right?
Yeah.
So that can also be an issue. So you need to just validate, what kind of resolution on the client side they're running.
Yeah, you know what usually is? It's usually administrators who are making master images on large monitors, and then the users are connecting with small monitors, and sometimes that negotiation fails the first time.
That's a good point. We'll take a look at that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Question over here on the right.
Are there any issues with VDI workloads and traditional server workloads coexisting on an all-flash storage array?
Friends don't like friends mixed workloads.
Yeah. We never recommend to mix workloads. Now, can you do it? Of course, right? If you have the IOPS to handle, a large amount of IOPS, then yeah, can you put servers and desktops on the same? But no, never would be recommended.
It depends on the scale. I mean, one of the things you need to consider is the dynamic nature of the desktops, not just from a workload profile, but also if you've got, say, link clones and you're recomposing,
right.
There's a lot of provisioning activity happening on the ESX host that could be impacting
right.
your server workloads. And if your server workloads are mission-critical apps, you might be worried about, and it's not just about storage, right? It's about CPU, memory utilization, and things like that.
Right, so you really don't recommend on the same storage array, but maybe we can have the same storage array but
right.
separate hosts,
yep.
or just keep the same.
Yep.
Possibly, it's just something to think about, right? Because like you say, you don't want to impact, it may not be so much about impacting your desktops, it may be about impacting your servers, right? Okay. You don't want them to slow down.
One thing I would recommend there is if you look at our reference architecture, the pod and block, we absolutely say, look, have a management block, right? And you know that management block performs from a storage perspective. And then you have a desktop block, right? And you have a defined set of compute, network, and storage that scales. Because the issue that I've seen with customers, as they scale out and they're mixing workloads on the storage, they hit that, I've deployed 3,000 VMs, and all of a sudden, they start getting problems because they don't have a scalable design. So I definitely recommend, work with the storage vendor about how you can ensure and carve up the storage to ensure you've got that dedicated, the IOPS requirement for both your server workloads and desktop.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you had a question over here?
Yeah, so we like to segment our workloads inside our company walls, and we've done that by using multiple connection brokers in the past. And more than actually more than the recommended or allowed number, and when we would call support, they would say, you need to get that number down before we can troubleshoot this issue. And we've done that, but we're not optimized in the way we like to segment these workloads where users can log in from. So my question is, A, do you know if there's any plan to increase the number of connection brokers you can have, and B, going over the number, what problems might we actually see?
Okay, good point. So we support a maximum of 7 active connection servers and a maximum of 10,000 connected sessions at any one time. Yeah. You can actually, this will be the last question. Thank you. Well, you can actually go above it, as long as you don't exceed the 10,000. Okay, that's the key thing. And I say you can go above it because certain times you need to configure a specific connection server for an authentication protocol, okay, for an authentication type, like smart card, like Radius, right? Now, what I will say is in 6.2, we've just released Access Point. That reduces the need for additional connection servers for specific authentication types, okay? Really? So that will help relieve, if you're doing two-factor authentication or whatever and having to put additional connection servers, we're relieving that through the use of Access Point.
That helps.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
I'm sorry, guys. We'll take some additional questions outside.
Yeah, we'll be out in the hall for. Okay.
All right, we'll be over there.
So we'll go over there if you guys want to come. We may not be able to answer them all, but we'll definitely try.